Ever hit post on social media and instantly regret it?
Yeah.
Like your heart starts racing, you're glued to the screen, watching the comment section spiral out of control.
Oh, tell me about it. The dreaded social media firestorm.
Now imagine that, but instead of your phone, it's an entire country. And those comments, those are nationwide protests.
Okay, now that's a whole other level of pressure.
And that is the high-stakes world of crisis communication that we're diving into today.
Sounds intense.
Buckle up because we are going straight into the heart of the Arab Spring.
Oh, wow. Okay, back in 2010, 2011.
Exactly. We're talking about the actual speeches given by leaders when everything was on the line. Tunisia, Egypt. These leaders were in the hot seat, and their every word could literally make or break their group on power.
No pressure, right?
Not at all. And to help us break down these make-or-break speeches, we've got our crisis communication guru.
Always happy to dissect a good speech, or, well, not so good speech, as the case may be.
So, full disclosure, we're pulling our insights from this fascinating 2012 research paper, Content Analysis of Crisis Communicative Strategies, Tunisian Protest versus anti-Mubarak Protest. They really get into the weeds with speeches from Tunisia's President Ben Ali and Egypt's President Mubarak. What makes this research so compelling for you?
Well, you have to remember the stakes. I mean, we're not just talking about a few bad headlines here. These were regimes toppled, entire power structures reshaped.
Huge.
Exactly. And by studying what these leaders said, and maybe even more importantly, how they said it, we get this incredible front row seat to understanding how communication can either, calm the flames or, well.
Or fan them into a full-blown inferno.
Precisely.
Which kind of begs the question, when you're in that position, when everything's on the line, where do you even start? Is there like a secret handbook for leaders facing a crisis, asking for a friend?
Well, you'd be surprised. This paper we're looking at, it actually lays out this framework called Coombs' model. Think of it as 5 main crisis communication strategies, like tools in a crisis management toolbox.
Okay, I'm all about tools and toolboxes. Lay it on me. What are we working with here?
So first up, you've got non-existence, basically trying to pretend the problem doesn't exist. Sweep it under the rug, downplay it, maybe even flat out deny it.
Classic avoidance strategy. What's next?
Then there's distance. The whole "it wasn't me" or "it's not as bad as it looks" kind of thing.
Right, so dodging the blame, minimizing the problem, check. What else?
Ingratiation. Now this one's all about winning over the crowd.
Right.
Praise your critics, play up those past accomplishments, anything to shift the mood,
Okay, so a little charm offensive in the midst of chaos.
You got it.
All right, what about the last two? What other tools are in the crisis communication arsenal?
We've got mortification. This is where you basically hold your hands up and say, "Yeah, we messed up, we're sorry." Express remorse, promise to make things right.
And the final tool in the toolbox.
Suffering. This is where you try to garner a bit of sympathy for yourself, You're a victim of circumstance, too.
Helping people will go a little easier on you if they think you're hurting, too.
Exactly.
So 5 very different approaches, each with their own potential benefits and risks. I'm guessing choosing the right one isn't as simple as just picking a number between 1 and 5, though.
You'd be right. This is where the research gets really interesting. They actually identify 4 key factors that influence which strategy a leader might choose.
Hit me.
So you've got the type of crisis, right? Then there's the evidence that's out there. You've got to consider the perceived damage and, of course, your past performance.
Context is everything.
100%. It's not just what you say, but why you say it, when you say it, who you're saying it to.
Okay, so let's put this framework into practice. First up, we've got Tunisia's President Ben Ali. This is a guy who went radio silent for 10 days before finally addressing the nation.
10 days is a long time when you're in the middle of a crisis.
You think speed would be key, right?
You would. But when he finally did speak, Ben Ali went all in on what we call the rectification strategy, which falls under the whole mortification approach we talked about. Lots of promises, pledges to fix things, you know the drill.
So after 10 days of silence, he finally speaks, and it's all, we're going to fix this. I don't know, feels a little reactive, even tone-deaf, given how massive these protests were.
And that's the problem. The research actually points out that he coupled all these promises with some pretty harsh intimidation tactics. Not exactly the best way to build trust or show genuine remorse.
Yeah, kind of like trying to put out a fire with gasoline.
Pretty much.
Speaking of trying to connect, the paper mentioned that Ben Ali actually switched from classical Arabic to a more, how do I put this, a more folksy Tunisian dialect in his final speech. Any thoughts on that? Desperate attempt to salvage his image or something else entirely?
It's an interesting tactic, right? Some might see it as a last-ditch effort to connect with people on a more, personal level. But then again, context is key. After years of using language to distance himself from the public, this sudden shift could easily backfire.
Come across as insincere.
Exactly. It just goes to show how every single choice, even something as subtle as a dialect, can have huge consequences during a crisis.
Which brings us to our next leader in crisis, Egypt's President Mubarak. How does approach stack up against Ben Ali?
Now, this is where things get really interesting. Unlike Ben Ali, Mubarak responded pretty quickly, addressed the nation within 3 days of the protests erupting, and his tone, man, totally different.
House.
He leaned heavily into the whole emotion thing, almost like he was trying to mirror the intensity of the protests.
So speed and emotion. Bold move. Did it work?
It's a tough one. I mean, yeah, a quick response can show you're, on top of things. But emotional appeals, they can easily backfire if they feel, I don't know, inauthentic, like you're trying too hard.
Especially in a climate where trust is already shaky.
Exactly. And this research actually highlights two specific strategies that Mubarak used. Praise, which is a form of ingratiation, right? And then suffering.
Okay, so which one was he going for? Trying to win people over or play the victim?
He kind of tried to do both. He actually praised the protesters, talked about their patriotism, how much he respected their, dedication to Egypt.
Did that go over?
About as well as you'd expect, because then, almost in the same breath, he starts painting himself as the victim of some elaborate conspiracy.
So I'm with you, but also I'm being unfairly targeted here. Tough sell.
Yeah, it's a tough needle to thread. And that's where both Ben Ali and Mubarak, they kind of miss the mark. They're so focused on managing the crisis in the moment that they completely miss the bigger picture. The underlying reasons why people are so angry in the first place. Their speeches, they're all about corrective actions, promises to fix things, but they don't address those deeper systemic issues that have been simmering for years.
So their words felt hollow because they didn't acknowledge the root causes of the unrest. Public distrust, corruption, you name it.
Exactly. And it all comes back to a point we touched on earlier. Most effective communication strategy. There isn't one. It all depends on the context. Understanding your audience is key.
It's like you said earlier, choosing the right tool for the job. Can you give an example of how this plays out in, maybe a less geopolitical crisis?
Sure. Let's say a company, right, they accidentally release a faulty product. If they've got a good track record, if they're known for being transparent, a sincere apology, a clear plan to make things right, that might be enough.
But if they've got a history of, say, ignoring customer complaints or cutting corners?
Totally different story.
Yeah.
A simple apology isn't going to cut it. They're going to need to take some serious action to regain that trust. Maybe offer significant compensation, make some major internal changes.
It's about understanding the existing narrative.
100%.
It makes you wonder, what if Ben Ali and Mubarak had tried something completely different? What if they had leaned into public opinion, acknowledged the legitimacy of the protests, committed to, real systemic change? Could that have changed things?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And, we can't exactly rewind history. But this research definitely seems to suggest that their whole approach, relying so heavily on corrective action without addressing the root causes, it definitely played a role in their downfall.
Wow. So it's not just about weathering the storm, it's about understanding why the storm hit in the first place.
Exactly.
And sometimes that requires a whole different approach, a whole different mindset.
It's like you're trying to rebuild a house on a foundation that's full of cracks. You can try to patch things up, but at some point, you got to address those deeper issues.
Otherwise, the whole thing's going to collapse again, right?
Exactly. And that's a powerful lesson for all of us, isn't it? I mean, it's not just about presidents and protests.
Definitely not. So how can we actually apply these insights to our own lives?
Well, think about it. Whether you're facing a tough crowd at work, a PR nightmare online, understanding these communication strategies, it can be a game changer.
Absolutely. Knowing the tools is one thing, but using them effectively is another. What's the key, you think?
Honestly, it always comes back to authenticity. You can't just go through the motions. You got to pair the right words with genuine action.
And be willing to address those root causes we were talking about.
100%. And that's why I find these historical examples so fascinating. They remind us that effective communication, especially in a crisis, it's about way more than just damage control.
It's about stepping up as a leader, being empathetic, really understanding the people you're trying to reach.
Now you're talking. That's the kind of approach that can weather any storm.
Wow. This deep dive has given me so much to think about.
Mm,
Who knew analyzing political speeches from a decade ago could be so relevant to our lives today?
right. It's all connected.
It really is. Well, that's all the time we have for today's deep dive into the world of crisis communication.
Always a pleasure.
Listeners, we want to hear from you. What were your takeaways from these high-stakes speeches? What resonated with you? What will you do differently in your next crisis? Head over to our social media and let us know. Let's keep this conversation going. And be sure to tune in next time when we'll be diving into a whole new set of fascinating sources. You never know what we'll uncover next.